we will get started because this looks like a good-sized group. We always have a few that aren't able to join us as originally planned, so I think I will get started. My name is Shelley O'Connor. I am the Community Engagement Lead for Hospice of Waterloo Region, and it is an absolute pleasure for me to be able to work with this team of volunteers, Patty, Wanda, Deb, and Lynn, who are with us today, and two of our other members were not able to be with us. And we've been doing this series online since the beginning of COVID, and really this is the culmination of all the work we've done, I think, in that we've focused on trying to help people understand how substitute decision-making works in Ontario, what advanced care planning looks like in this province. And, you know, from the beginning, whenever we start talking about advanced care planning, people always want to get right to the conversation. So today it's about the conversations, and we're going to take a little bit of time to go over just the fundamentals a little bit, but then the bulk of today's session will be on what the heck is involved in these conversations and how do we get past our reluctance to get into these conversations. So just a couple of housekeeping items for you. I'm asking you to mute your audio during the presentation part. And if you do have questions, I'm asking you to put them in the chat, and I will keep an eye on that, and I'll ask my team to also help me keep an eye on that in case I get distracted. And we'll bring up the questions as we go along as appropriate. I have also placed in the chat a copy of the question or statement page that we sent out to you ahead of time, which will be the focus of the small group discussion. So if you don't have it in front of you, it is in the chat and you can download it from there. This session is being recorded, so we will be sharing that recording afterwards, send that out to you. Although just to remind people that the small group discussion is not part of the recording. So that you feel comfortable sharing if you feel like it, that will not be part of the recording. I think that's everything that I wanted to say up front. I did share this slide because really we want to emphasize the fact that advanced care planning is about how you live, not about once you have died. So it's really about what's important to you in order to live the kind of life that you want to live and to be able to share that with other people. I wanted to start today. I had an amazing opportunity. Well, actually, I should tell you one thing before we start. In terms of advanced care planning, my team would be reminding me to tell you, we want you to wear two hats today. We want you to wear the hat as the person who has to share their wishes, their priorities with a loved one, their substitute decision makers, in the event that somebody else has to decide for you. We also want you to wear the hat of being someone's substitute decision maker and what that's like if you are in a situation where you have to make decisions for somebody else, and what kind of information would help you to make those decisions. It's very likely that every one of us under Ontario law at some point is going to be somebody's substitute decision maker, even if we haven't been asked. It's also very likely as we're living longer and living with more chronic diseases, and there's a very good possibility that at our end of life, somebody else will be making decisions on our behalf. So we need to plan ahead, as Dr. Mannix would say. And that's a great segue for me because Dr. Catherine Mannix is a retired palliative care doctor from the UK who wrote an amazing book. I don't know if you can, I can't really see it. It's called With the End in Mind. And for those of you who've read Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal, this is right up there with Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal. She tells about 30 different stories of conversations that she had with people. And as a palliative care doctor, a lot of it was at end of life, but they're rich and very genuine in the discussions she had. And she always used a cup of tea as a way to introduce the conversation. So I had I was very fortunate last week to be able to interview her about her book, but also about advanced care planning and her take on it. So I wanted to start the session by just showing you a clip from that where I asked her, okay, so what is advanced care planning about? So hopefully the technology works and you're able to watch this. Here we go. And we find people really don't understand advanced care planning. So maybe we'll start there. If you want to share a little bit about how you see advanced care planning, what is it?
Okay, so we got very hung up, haven't we, on a process with a name. We're calling the process advanced care planning, and already we think, well, you know, that's just such curious English.
Oops, sorry.
What can that mean? And if we just called it planning ahead, we wouldn't be falling over ourselves all the time, would we? I want to talk to you today about planning ahead. Oh, yes, okay, I know what that means. So you wouldn't go on your holidays without booking the accommodation at the other end or booking the travel to get there. So you planning ahead for what's going to happen. And we do that for the rest of our lives as well, don't we? So I've just described to you planning ahead my career, thinking I was going to do one thing, having a go at that, thinking, actually, do you know what, this bit is a bit more interesting. So now I'm changing my mind. And so one of the core principles of planning ahead, advanced planning, planning ahead of time, whatever we want to call it, is we kind of make a decision and we move in the direction of the decision, and then we have another life experience and we change our minds a bit. And what's actually changing is what really matters to us is changing. What my priorities are changing. So when I was a young doctor, my priority was to earn enough money to pay the mortgage. That was a really, really important priority. But I wanted to do it in an area of medicine that I found enjoyable. So I found an area of medicine that I found enjoyable, and I earned my money, and then I kind of changed my focus. But what was important to me was I would go to work and feel that I was making a difference. And all of your volunteers will be people who volunteer because they care about people and they make a difference. So we plan and we follow through on our plans by thinking about what really matters to us as people.
Okay. So as you can see, she's very genuine, she's lovely, and she has a really great perspective, and we'll hear a little bit more from her at the end, but I'm now going to turn it over to Lynn.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So we'll just do a quick recap on the rules around advanced care planning in Ontario. And we always have to remember that these apply in Ontario. The government of Ontario pays for our healthcare, therefore they legally regulate our healthcare. So the first thing to remember in healthcare is there is
So I figured it would be really easy.
There is a Healthcare Consent Act, which says that before providing any treatment, healthcare providers must obtain an informed consent from a person, not a piece of paper, a person. What is informed consent? The medical team must explain to you, this is what's wrong with you, this is what I can do about it, this is what you may suffer as side effects that are good, not so good, what side effects do we hope are going to improve your quality, those kind of things, and offer alternatives. The informed consent, as I said, must come from a person. The first person it comes from is the patient. But if the patient is not mentally capable of giving consent, either they're unconscious, dementia, on a lot of medications that they're not thinking clearly briefly, and then later they'll be able to make decisions on their own again. If that patient cannot make competent decisions, someone else makes decisions on their behalf. And it's not the medical team, it's someone in your life. And that is your substitute decision maker, a person that is either assigned to you by the government, which I'll go through in a second, or it's someone who you have chosen to make decisions on your behalf. And hopefully you've talked to that person about what decisions they should make. So here's how the medical team would look to find a substitute decision maker. Start at the top of the list and work down until they find the first person that is on the list to make decisions for you, and then they stop looking. Once you've found that first person, you don't look anymore. The first person is a court-appointed guardian. You'll know if that's you because you've been sitting in a lawyer's office a lot of hours discussing and filling out applications and paperwork. This might be someone with an adult child who has a mental disability that will never be able to make decisions on their own. So you would know if that's you. The next one is the attorney that you have named when you did a power of attorney for personal care. This attorney does not mean lawyer. This means someone who speaks for you. You have thought about it. You have assigned someone legally to represent you in your personal care needs, if the need should arise. And you have done the paperwork either by going to a lawyer and filling out the forms, or by downloading from the internet a simple 2-page document that you can find just by Googling Power of Attorney for Personal Care in Ontario. It sends you to the correct website, and you fill out that document. It tells you how to make it legal, and that would be the person who would speak on your behalf. Just an aside, when you are appointing a Power of Attorney for personal care, please don't appoint your whole family. Things do not go smoothly when a lot of people are trying to make a decision for your health care. It goes much more smoothly if one or possibly two people are making those decisions. They can rely on other people's input, but one or two people to have that final answer is plenty. It's a good idea to appoint an alternate. If that person is not available or willing to answer questions and offer consents, then there should be an alternate who is there ready for a backup. The next one is a representative appointed by Consent and Capacity Board. This is not a common one. This is someone who has not prepared a document to have someone else make the decisions, and someone else steps in and says, I would like to make decisions for that person. And they'll go in front of the courts and the lawyers and be appointed as that person's representative. Then it gets down into the green section, which is family. Family is who you say it is, but family is who the government says it is in this situation. The first person they would recognize in your family as your substitute decision maker is your spouse or partner. Spouse or partner can be same sex, opposite sex, legally married, or common law. You only have to be common law for 1 year to be considered the spouse as far as making legal healthcare decisions. Remember one thing here. If you and your spouse are no longer together, you're either divorced or separated, that is no longer your spouse. So not making decisions for you unless you had appointed that person legally as your power of attorney for personal care. Then that ex-spouse is still making decisions for you because they're higher up on that list of hierarchy. Maybe that's who you want to make decisions for you. Maybe it isn't. So it's one more thing to remember if there's a marriage breakdown. Then you go down into parents and children. This is everybody on any of these lines has to speak with one voice, come to a unanimous decision, and give the healthcare providers one answer, not multiple choice answers. The sandwich generation is in a tough spot with this line, the parents and children. A child only has to be 16 years of age to be considered legally able to make decisions for someone else's health care. That's pretty young to make decisions that are this important and serious. So as a sandwich generation, you could have adult children and competent parents, and they would all have to work together to make those decisions on your behalf should the need arise. It's difficult for grandparents and grandchildren to work together because grandparents never think their grandchildren are adults. They always think they're just children and shouldn't have this imposed on them. So it can be very difficult. If there is a separation and one parent has full custody of a minor and the other one only has right of access, they can only have supervised visits, weekend visits, that sort of thing. They come below the parent who has full custody. Then if there's none of those, you get into siblings. You can have a lot of siblings and they may be scattered all over the place. And you may not really have spent a lot of time discussing these issues with your siblings since you've grown into being 60 and 70 years old. It's not what we talk about a lot. So again, your siblings would all have to come together and make one decision unanimously and give that answer to the healthcare team. If there is nobody on this list so far, then it goes down to any other relative. That's anyone you're related to by blood, by marriage, by adoption, it can be a huge number of people. And again, all of those people have to work together and come up with one single answer to give to the healthcare team. I've often come across at these, when we give these presentations, so many times somebody will say, I honestly do not have anybody who would speak for me. Someone will be appointed by the courts for you. That is a public guardian and trustee. That is a person who may never have met you. They'll come in and they'll read your chart in the hospital and they'll make a decision about your healthcare based on what they're reading in the chart without knowing anything about you. The other time the public guardian and trustee comes into play is if there's ever a dispute. As I said, that all the people on each of those lines have to give a unanimous answer to the healthcare decisions. If the family cannot agree, the medical team may say to them, we are taking this to the courts and we will have someone appointed to make decisions for you because you can't work together and you're not getting decisions made. So it will be taken out of the family's hands and a public guardian and trustee would be appointed on your behalf to make decisions for you. So now with all those heavy thoughts to think about, I'll pass this over to Patty.
Thanks very much, Lynn. As you can see after what Lynn has outlined to you, how important it is for you to make a decision and appoint the substitute decision maker that you really want. So Lynn's talked about that first part of advanced care planning, identifying who that person is if you're unable to make decisions for yourself. We're now going to move on to the second aspect of advanced care planning, having conversations with your substitute decision maker and your other loved ones about what's important to you. And both of these things should happen long before there is a crisis. This is not always easy to do. And to set the stage for our discussion today, we're going to show you two videos. The first video, entitled 6 Voices, is from the Conversation Project. This was a series of US researchers who visited a company and talked about advanced care planning with the employees. They then asked them to go home and have conversations with family members. In the video, they talk about their experiences and how valuable it was. And from following that one, we're going to see a second video. In this video, Dr. Atu Gawande, author of the book Being Mortal, which Shelley referenced earlier, talks about having end-of-life conversations and strategies you can use to find out what is important to the patient. So we're going to watch both videos, and then I'll do a little bit of a summary after that before we move forward into discussion groups. So thanks, Shelley.
Okay. Bear with me as I pull this up and hope it works. And so we will go right from one video to the next one, and then we'll hand it back to Patty.
Thank you.
So I figured it would be a really easy conversation. My parents were really open to it. They thought it was a good idea, and I could not get myself to start it.
It was really something that made me uneasy, and it was something that I was really uncomfortable with.
So I knew that I should have it, and somehow I think found every reason not to have it.
And I wasn't ready to think about what does it mean that my dad's going to pass away at some point, and how do we deal with that.
And I never thought that I would have to make decisions like this for my mom.
The conversation's a process. It's not a one-time thing. At least I don't see it as a one-time thing. I think it's nice to revisit periodically.
So instead of having the conversation with my family, I did end up having the conversation with several of my friends from a similar cultural background.
So finally, we went for a hike, and we were supposed to have the conversation at dinner. That didn't happen, and then we went home. We still hadn't had the conversation, and finally my dad said, I thought we were going to have a conversation. So that's how it started. And suddenly I realized in the moment I needed to become very, very, very quiet. And my mom needed to become very, very, very loud. And I started to just listen in a very, very present way to every single thing that she had to say. And then suddenly I started to know what questions to ask. And they weren't clinical questions. It was like, at what point, Mom, do you want me to step in and help make decisions for your life? And she said to me, well, at the point at which I can't sit down and pray with you kids. And that's really poignant. That's not making a decision about a ventilator. That's not making a do not resuscitate decision. That's something very, very simple. And all I could say to her is, yes, Mom, I will do that for you.
Because I think that the human thing is to feel like, I don't want to play God. I'm not in a position to play God and make a decision about someone's life or death.
My sister and I had very different views about what we should be doing. And in our conversations, it wasn't about what I wanted or what my sister wanted. It was about what my dad wanted and now what my mom will want for her care. What was important for my dad was that he be at home with his family. He did not want to be in the hospital while he was really ill. And it turned out that he wanted to die at home, and we were able to do that for him.
I think we really talked about the spirit of what is life to you and what does it mean. And I think my mom, the most powerful thing she said was, you just need to know to tell the care professionals who are taking care of me or him who we are when we're not in a hospital bed. And if they know that, I have no doubt that you'll be able to have a conversation with them about what is the right kind of treatment.
I wish I could have sort of looked my father in the eyes and had that conversation. But I think that what most of us end up doing is just the best we can under really, really difficult circumstances.
You know, I have a son, and then I'm going to have the other talk at some point in his life. And it's like, yeah, you're going to have these talks throughout your life that are just uncomfortable. But if everyone is aware that they have to have that talk and can talk about it, you know, it makes it easier.
I think it made us closer because we were able to talk about and emotionally deal with how we felt. I could tell my dad, I love you, and I don't want to talk about this, but we need to talk about it. And we got to respect each other for that.
And now, knowing how comfortable my mom is, and it only came from that conversation, we're much more comfortable that it's just another stage in life, and it will be just fine.
So on to the next one.
Thanks, Shelley.
This is Atul Gawande.
These are hard conversations. I've blown them many times myself. I've not known what to do. And with this study coming out from the Mass General where the patients had seen a palliative care physician, I realized that the gain they'd gotten was that really they'd seen 6 people who knew how to, that's the staff at the Mass General for palliative care, that they'd seen one of these 6 people who knew how to talk to them about the end of life. And so what I did was I went to those doctors and just said, I'm really bad at this. If you had to make a little list for me of what it is that I should talk about with people facing these problems, what would you put on that list? One of the doctors that I spoke to was a palliative care physician at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute named Susan Block. And Susan encapsulated it, I thought, the best for me, at least in a way that I could use. She said that there were 4 things that she has as a little mental list in her head that she wants to talk about with a patient who's terminally ill. Number 1, do they know their prognosis? Number 2, what are their fears about what is to come? Number 3, what are their goals? What would they like to do as time runs short? And 4th, what are the trade-offs they're willing to make? How much suffering are they willing to go through for the sake of the possibility of added time? That list was really interesting to me. It was not a list asking, do you want a ventilator or do you not want a ventilator as you come to the end? Do you want your heart shocked? Do you not want your heart shocked? Her point was, if you tell me the answers to those questions, I can make a recommendation to you that says, you would not want this toward the end if these are your goals. Our misconception is that the conversation is about hard choices. Really, it's a conversation about asking people about what they want to look forward to as time runs short and what they fear the most. And the second misconception is that it's that arriving at what we want at the end is a kind of epiphany. Sign here, do you want hospice, do you not want hospice? It's not an epiphany, it's a process. It's a series of conversations and ups and downs as we go through a very hard series of sequence of things that happen to you as you become ill and have things come to an end.
Thanks very much, Shelley. I first viewed both of these videos 2.5 years ago when I was going through my training to become a hospice volunteer. And they had a very, very profound and personal impact on me. 6 voices emphasize how you need to have these conversations now, not later when you are in a health crisis. And Dr. Gwande talks about what you should talk to a patient about as they near end of life. He provides a mental checklist. I'm going to review it for you because we really like his questions. Do they know their prognosis? Do they know what's going to happen to them? What are their fears? What are their goals? And what do they want to do as time runs short? And finally, what trade-offs are they willing to make to do so? And how much suffering do they want to endure for the sake of added time? We often have misconceptions about these conversations, but he points out it's not about hard choices such as ventilators. It's more about sharing what you want to look forward to, back to our friend Snoopy, while you are still living. It's not just about dying. Arriving at what you want at end of life is not an epiphany. It's a process, a series of conversations through serious ups and downs that happen as you become more and more ill and come towards your end of life. I want to share with you a very personal story, and this is why these videos had such an impact on me. About 6 years ago, my sister was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer of the appendix. She only lived for 4 months after her surgeon realized that the cancer had spread throughout her abdominal cavity undetected over a number of years. My sister was an accountant and a very practical woman. The day she received the diagnosis and this devastating news from her daughter, she invited her husband and each of her 3 children individually into her hospital room for a personal and private conversation. During that conversation, she told them that she knew how severe her diagnosis was. She knew her prognosis, and that she wanted to share her hopes, fears, and her decision about treatment. She followed the steps that Dr. Gwande outlined in his film, so you can imagine how listening to this after having experienced that with her had such a profound impact on me. In addition, she asked each of them to share their hopes and fears for the time she would remain with them and in the years to come. It's an extremely brave and emotional thing to do, but unfortunately, a conversation she should have had years before. She decided to postpone any treatment until she had taken her dream trip to Tuscany in Italy. And so she and her husband and a few friends spent 2 glorious weeks there enjoying the best of Italian food and wine. Upon her return, she chose to try chemotherapy treatments, partly to appease her family's wish that she not give up. That was their hope. But also in the hope that she would live long enough to see her first grandson. The chemo treatments were extremely strong, and she lost her ability to eat and decided to have a feeding tube inserted. It was the strain on her heart from the feeding tube that was the ultimate cause for death the day after it was inserted. She did not live to see her grandchild, but I was able to share mine. The courage my sister demonstrated and the link to the advice given in the presentation by Atu Gwande will remain with me forever. I only wish she had had those conversations earlier when her family was not feeling such emotional stress and would have been better informed about her priorities in life. Her death has been a catalyst for our family to have conversations on a regular basis. Very profound impact on me. And I was one of those people that during the training for the volunteers would often have little teary moments. And I think you can understand why this story helps illustrate why that would happen. So I'm now going to turn it over to Wanda, who will introduce you to our group discussion for today. And hopefully we can have some teary moments together in our groups. Wanda?
Thanks, Patty. And thank you for sharing that story. It's a really lovely story and points out so many of the the issues that we've been talking about and that we will be talking about. As you've heard already several times today, these conversations are about living your life from today until your life, your wishes, and or your health may change. It is a process, and your thoughts and feelings may change as you have these conversations. Let's look at Patty's story about her sister and the conversation she had with her family. Most of us don't have these conversations until there is a critical health issue and there is pressure to make a quick decision. It is much more liable to be a right decision for you and your loved ones if there have been conversations about and sharing of feelings about life and love. You're the expert on your life, your wishes, and your needs, and you want your substitute decision maker to understand these things. You can also look at these issues, as Shelley said, from the viewpoint of being the substitute decision maker for another, a family member, a friend, even a colleague. What do you need to know about their thoughts and wishes? What questions would you want to ask them? Just a little story I was thinking about this morning. I have a friend who has a roomer living with him right now. That's not a rumor story, but a roomer living with him. He's a recent immigrant who's not related to him, but they've become quite close in sharing their stories about life, etc. My friend had asked his daughter to be his substitute decision maker, and they had had good conversations about his wishes and how he would like things to go. She's a very thoughtful person as well and had asked all of the right questions. But after a few weeks, she called him back to ask how he would like her to deal with this person. She's a thoughtful and caring substitute decision maker, and this is an example that the issues and questions can't all be taken care of in one conversation. We all need time on both sides of the question to sort of think over what issues have come up and, oh, suddenly there's another one that needs to be taken care of. So I'm going to ask you now to refer to the statements and questions that were sent out to you yesterday, and we'll break into smaller groups to discuss our thoughts and responses to these questions. The list of questions will be posted on our chat, as Shelley has said, as well, if you haven't been able to print them. We've asked you to pick the 2 most important and perhaps 1 or 2 of the least important issues for you. Remember, there are no right or wrong answers to any of these things. Sharing these things can be difficult, so you always have the option to pass on responding. Just hearing others' thoughts may encourage you to share some of yours. We'll spend about 25 minutes in the groups that will be facilitated by one of our team members, and then regroup to talk with Deb about how to start these conversations that we're going to be talking about. Shelley?
Okay, so as Wanda said, there will be one of the volunteer ambassadors in each group, and I'm going to put you in those groups now. You just have to accept the room placement. If you haven't done it before, you'll get something on your screen, and then you'll have about 25 minutes, and I will send a 1-minute notice when we're getting close to the end of the time. Enjoy the conversation.
We chatted a lot, and of course the stories are where the richness of the conversation comes from, and everyone was very much willing to share in our group, so I thank you all. But as the presentation today is all about is how do you start? How do you get going? So by now, most of you are probably having conversations with yourself in your mind about how difficult having these talks just could be. So if you can think about a conversation that you may have been putting off with a coworker, with a family member, with a friend, did you try it and it didn't go well, or you fear that you're going to get it all wrong? Are you worried that your emotions might get in the way of being effective in the conversation? So if we can pull up the bubble slide, if folks have it now in front of you, these are some possible phrases that just might get you started. We are.
Yay!
So here's one of the tools that we use in our presentations when we are allowed to go out into the public. Here are some possible phrases that could get you started. You may want to take some notes in preparation. You may even want to practice a bit. So the one in the bottom left is classic. I was at a workshop today. I'd like to share some information that I learned with you. I just filled out a booklet about myself and I'd like to share. Or I was thinking about what happened to fill in the blank. The story that I shared in my group was my dad coming home and thinking about what had happened to a good friend of his. And it made him realize that we needed to have a conversation about what his choices would be. So these are all potential openers to a conversation that might be a little bit rough at the beginning. Try to set the stage, be in a comfortable environment where privacy can be assured. If you're being asked to fulfill the role as a substitute decision maker, there's an acronym that we learned in our training sessions called WAIT. Why am I talking? Watch for the body language. Acknowledge that you're hearing what's being said. Be curious, clarify, and please know that if you're being asked to take on the role of substitute decision maker, you might just have to say, wait, I just need to ponder on this a bit, and be really clear in your willingness to take on the role. If you're asking somebody to be your substitute decision maker, try to have mentally practiced a bit and thought about how they might perceive this ask. Are they going to be honored by it? Are they going to be anxious and worried? Do they just not want to talk about it at all? Be sure to tell them what attributes you think they have that has led you to consider them as for this challenging role. Try to be as calm and as matter of fact as you can be. Above all, remember, there's an S in the word conversations. This topic is not going to be settled in just one talk. It may be necessary to revisit the information many times as your health and circumstances change. And one of the conversations we had in our group was the need to write down or make some journal notes, or just be as reflective as you can in writing before you have the conversations, because then you've got a bit of a backup. So those are the things that we chatted about. Back to you, Shelley.
I'm going to just take this down for a second. And before I go on, I just wondered if there were any questions. We haven't really given you a chance. Well, maybe you just did 25 minutes of asking questions, but is there anything based on what you've heard so far that you'd like to ask the team before we move in towards the end of the session? Is there anything? I don't see anything in the chat. So if you guys are good, then I'll just continue. I do have a poll for you as we get to the end of the session. This is the first online version of the conversation that we've done, with the hope that we could really try to focus in. We know that when people are saying, well, you just need to share what your wishes and your values are, so that the person understands what you want, is a little bit overwhelming. So we tried to break this down to make it a little more genuine, a little more real, a little more normal kind of conversation. So I'm going to just throw this poll up just to get your feedback. Great results. So that's the best we've had so far, ladies. Does anybody have, before I do the closing, is there anything people want to add to what you've, to expand on what you've identified here in terms of what tools you're walking away with, or what is about this conversation that's helped you feel more confident?
I think I just want to thank you, Shelley, and the team of Hospice for doing these presentations. I think they're awesome, and continue doing them. I'll try to encourage my friends to attend.
Excellent, Ruth. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. No problem. So where we wanted to bring you back to before you leave today is just a little bit of inspiration again from Dr. Mannix. I have to say that she is the first person I've heard talk about advanced care planning and your wishes and values as priorities and not as values, because we find in our presentations sometimes it's hard for people to get their heads wrapped around, okay, well, what do you mean by values? She talks about priorities. She talks about the fact that knowing what's important to you, it's then the job of the healthcare provider to match those priorities that you've expressed, or they're being expressed through your substitute decision maker, with the treatment being offered, as opposed to it often being, especially during COVID, a discussion about what treatments you want or don't want. So I really value that perspective that she provided. She also talks about the fact that we go into these conversations like it's a fight, that it's a negative thing that we have to do, when in actual fact, she calls them conversations of love, which I think also helps us look at it a little bit differently. So I just wanted to share with you the last clip from the last part of my interview that I did with her. So I think it's inspiring. And after I show you that clip, we'll talk a little bit about what happens next. If you're talking to an audience, what are you going to tell them?
Well, I think that this is our superpower. This absolutely is our superpower. And when Shirley and I were first sitting down this afternoon, I was showing her the paperback cover for the British version of the book. That's a much posher teacup and saucer than I would ever use. You know you're going to need a whole book through to get a conversation like this, okay? But actually there's something really lovely about sitting down together as two people who are having a cup of tea to talk about something that's really important. And if this is your parent, this is your spouse, this is your child, this is your best friend, this is a tender conversation between people who love each other. Let's not make it difficult. Let's not make it complicated. Let's just say, okay, so we're going to talk about this. And the really best plan is to have a really good plan for what you're going to talk about after this. Okay, so this conversation is going to be followed by, I've got the holiday photographs of the grandchildren back to show you. Or we're going to go back through the old photograph albums of the grandchild's wedding from last year. We're going to do something together that's going to make us smile, that's going to lift our mood. So even if we've become a little bit weary or sad during a conversation about what matters most, we've got a lift at the end. But generally what happens is when you have the conversation about what matters most, it lifts it anyway. And these conversations are often surprisingly joyful and surprisingly full of laughter. So maybe we should go into them with lighter hearts and stop dragging ourselves down so much as we have been.
Okay. So that's the end of the clips and the back and forth on the sharing the screen and everything else that we did today. We really appreciate you being here. As I said, this is the first time we've tried to do this kind of conversation this way, and we really appreciate the positive feedback. As a team, we are committed to continuing to provide these sessions, so we will be offering more online sessions in January. We'll see what kind of creativity comes into play for those ones. I will be sending out a copy of the recording and a little evaluation to go along with that, so we can get some more feedback from you on a personal level. We did send out resources on the different aspects of advanced care planning. Feel free to visit our website, and I'll send that link to you if you need more information. And on that note, I will say thank you to this incredible group of volunteers. And if anybody has any last words of wisdom or thoughts before we close it off, you're getting out of school early today, people. So that's always a bonus on a beautiful day. Anything anybody wants to add?
Thank you very much for having this. I've been with Hospice doing in-home care and at Lazard House for over 20 years, 25 years. So it's, this has been needed. Like we've needed this. I quite often have over the years run into things where the caregivers are asking me in their home, you know, some of these questions, you know, what should I be doing, or how is it done, or who do I see? This type of thing is good for volunteers to get involved in. Very, it's practical, and it's very necessary for the people that that I'm seeing.
And
Thank
Mary,
you for that.
That's a great point that I always say, never walk away from these conversations. If somebody gives you that, jump on it. whether you're the right person for them to be talking to, you're the right person at the time.
Exactly.
Hear them where they need to go with this conversation. They might just be using you as a practice run to talk to their family.
Yeah. When I hear advertisements about the most important thing you have to do is have a will, I'm yelling at the TV screen, no, no. The important thing you have to do is before you die. What you want done.
That's excellent.
Also, don't believe a lawyer who says, yes, you just put down the name for your attorney of personal care document and then file it with your will. And
Oh.
you're done.
Yeah, yeah.
Favorite, love it.
So wrong.
This is a panel of experts. All right. Well, thank you again very much. And if the volunteer team can just stay on a little bit afterwards, otherwise I'm going to close the session. Thanks very much, everyone, and I will be in touch.
Thank you.